Before we broke for the crass commercial messages, I had let Mr. Russell, who has a genius for mischief, talk me into agreeing to sing to you.
That's certainly the high point of my career.
Yeah, it's the low point of mine.
And a radio first.
Yes, at the end of my career. You know.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, stepping up to the microphone.
If I loved you, words would come in an easy way. Round in circles I'd go, longing to tell you, but afraid and shy. I let my golden moment pass me by, so I'd lose you off you would go in the midst of day. Never, never, oh no, I loved you. If I loved you.
Bravo! Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.
And now that my career is ended, and nobody will ever take me seriously again.
I just won $20. No, I didn't.
I knew there was something
No,
behind
thanks
this.
a lot.
Oh, you're
that
welcome,
was fun.
sir.
That was...
Well, thank you. Listen,
It's all over for me now. I mean,
for you.
I'll never...
You think it's over for you? I'm finished in this town. I'm finished in 222 markets.
Yeah, but I'll never get inside the Beltway again.
Not if I have anything to do with it, Joel. Oh, boy, oh, boy. Oh, well, let's see. What's the name of your CD? Death and Taxes. No. Oh, my. This is
I think
wonderful.
we made history today. I really
Yes,
do. In our own way.
Yes, and I'm just assuming we hadn't, but that's all right. Oh, boy.
Well, I can understand how you freak those cons out over there.
That's right. Scared the living hell out of them, I did. Yes, indeed.
Man, they got a radio on over the D.C. jail. Hey, there's Gordon again.
Gee. Oh, that was quite a dump, that jail. And but seriously, it was a very foul place, and to give credit where credit is due. The American Civil Liberties Union's National Prison Project had brought the lawsuit, which was finally successful, and the federal judge who rendered the decision about that said, not only am I ordering everyone out of this edifice, but I hereby order it physically destroyed, so no human being can ever be put in there again.
Yeah.
And it was.
Yeah.
It was. And I'm delighted to have been any kind of a part of that I might have been. I don't know. All right. We will go now to Rochester, New Hampshire, and speak to Candy. Hi, Candy.
Hi, Gordon. How you doing?
Oh, virile, vigorous, and potent, Candy.
Okay, I knew you were going to say that. I have a question for you. I've heard you often talk about schools and education and how children need to be prepared for the world out there, etc. What are your thoughts about efforts to teach nonviolent conflict resolution to young people?
Well, the problem is that's like standing in front of a tank and trying to argue with it. There are, I'll tell you the best conflict resolution, thing is this. Don't start a fight. Always finish a fight that someone starts with you.
Well, that leads me sort of to the second point I want to raise. I don't know if we're going to have time to get into it, but, our culture is a very violent one, and I would go so far as to say we live in a society that really glorifies violence, and, many of the themes that you like to talk about and things that you are interested in, I think, exemplify this glorification of violence. And even your response to my question suggests an assumption that violence is necessary, that it's primary, that it's the way that things have to be resolved, and also you.
Well, see, the reason for that is, Candy, that the nature of man is as it is. For example, let us say that your child is confronted by a bully on the schoolyard. You know, he's a bigger kid and this, that, and the other thing. And and the guy says some things about his mother or something like that that are, fighting words. But your son turns around and walks away from him. That isn't going to help him, because the bully is going to just going to follow him and probably hit him from the back.
Right, but you're assuming that there. I mean, obviously, if we as a society decided to make a concerted effort to emphasize mediation skills, compromise skills.
Let me tell you a true story, Candy. Let me tell you a true story. I went to school with a French lad who we were both 17. We were in our first year in college. He was French. This was immediately after the Second World War. His father had been in a Nazi concentration camp. He wasn't a Jew, but he had refused to use Jewish slave labor. Put him in a Nazi concentration camp. Family fled to the south of France. Lived for a year and a half on sunflower seeds and rat meat. And he said, I said to him, listen, in the field, on the ground, you had more troops, more tanks, and more aircraft in France than the Germans had deployed against you. And yet they defeated you in 30 days. Have you reflected upon that? And he said, believe me, I have. And he said, let me tell you that circa 1938, when I was 8 years old, if I came into the house with a bloody nose, my mother, and because I'd had a fight with my friend Pierre, my mother would say, look, in the future, don't ever let it get to that. If there's a conflict between you and Pierre, just walk away, back off, because you are the cleverer of the two, and so you should retire. And he said, all over France, our mothers were teaching us that. And he said, all over Germany at exactly the same time, the German mothers were telling their children there is absolutely nothing that cannot be accomplished by a member of the Hitlerjugend, because you can grow up to be a member of the Waffen-SS and you can conquer the world. And nothing can stand in front of you. Now, he said, when those two philosophies clashed, it took them only 30 days, although we had superior tanks, superior aircraft, and more troops. It took them only 30 days to destroy us.
Yeah, but what about a situation if the philosophy, there wouldn't be a clash of philosophies, but the nonviolent philosophy was universal?
Then you would have the millennium. Christ will have come down for the second time, the angel Gabriel, and they will have touched everybody's soul and changed the nature of man.
When there are efforts to solve international disputes without violence, but with the use of mediation or diplomacy, you and many other people criticize this and make a mockery of it.
You know why? Because it just puts it off. That was what happened at Munich, and they said, peace in our time, and it led to the Nazi conquest of Europe.
You have a very dark view of human nature.
I happen to be very well acquainted with human nature.
Well, maybe it's time to, rethink some of the way we've been doing things.
Candy, it is time for you to study history. Then I think perhaps
history. It's a series of wars after wars after wars.
And now you are absolutely right. You are absolutely right. And it shall continue to be such. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. The Romans had it best. See these Pacem Parabellum if you want peace.
Westwood One Radio Networks.
As P.S., I listened to the first 2 hours of your program on a scratchy, static-filled Louisville station, 790 WWKY, because our local station, 550 WKRC, has you on a 4-hour delay. Well, now, wait a minute, just make sure everybody understands here. The reason that WWKY is scratchy and static-filled for this listener is because he's not in Louisville, he's in Cincinnati. If he were in Louisville, it would be coming in 5 by 5, loud and clear. Let's see, one advantage of the tape delay that you may have overlooked.
And I don't like Bill Clinton. I don't like anything he's done. I didn't vote for him. I don't think that he's the kind of person we need to be president. But the question is Vietnam.
Okay.
And I understand very clearly that all citizens have an obligation to defend their country, their homeland, their family, and I don't have any problem with that. I just don't think Vietnam was ever a threat. I think that the same kind of people as Bill Clinton probably specifically LBJ, who I didn't like either, were responsible for a war that was not a war. We put American lives in harm's way, and I was pro-Vietnam during high school, and by the time I got to college, several of my friends who had been to Vietnam and returned told me, under no circumstances, go to Vietnam. Whatever you can do to avoid it, because it's not defending our country. In fact, they felt, and I think I agree with this impression, is that the people in Vietnam were very similar to the American Minutemen, who were being invaded by not one but two foreign countries, who were battling over the way that that country be run. And I understand that they were our allies, although I don't know who would want the Vietnamese government as an ally, either North or South. They're both, I think, fairly unstable and certainly don't support the same values as the American people hope for their own government. And it just seems like Vietnam was much different than World War II. It was a policy mistake, and I think a lot of noble Americans were sacrificed. And some of the people that I know that went to Vietnam that survived physically are changed forever, and not in a positive way, by the experiences that they endured there. And for what? They never protected the homeland, although that was the reason they went there. And I think their intentions were the best and the purest, and I think they certainly are heroes. But I don't think it was an honorable or just war, and I think that it was a case of the government, almost similar to the German government. You don't question, you go where we send you and fight. And I think that's not being a good American when you do that. I think you have to be very careful about the fight you pick, because it's life or death, it's survival. And again, I would not hesitate to defend my homeland or my country, but I don't trust Bill Clinton, and I didn't trust LBJ to tell me where to go to defend my homeland. So I'd just like to hear you clarify that.
Okay. You've raised a number of good points and interesting points. First of all, in sort of inverse order, about your meeting veterans of the Vietnamese War who come back and whose experiences there have not affected them in a positive way, which is a very kind and charitable way to say that some people, when they come back from wars, came back from that war, came back almost dysfunctional. That's true of just about any war. There's plenty of guys who came back from the Second World War and were in bad shape because of their experiences there. You get your buddy's head,
Sure.
Just blown apart like a melon all over you and things like that. It's very difficult to deal with. Okay, so that's something that is common to all wars. Now we go to the Vietnamese War in particular and to what it was all about. Now, remember, this was at the height of the Cold War. And what was being attempted was a southward march throughout Southeast Asia down there of communism. Now, that was really to be expected, and it doesn't have to be communist or anything else. You've got, prior to that, the example of the Japanese. That's just exactly the way the Japanese went. They went south to capture the riches of Asia when Imperial Japan was on the march. And right now, you've got China growing ever more powerful, moving into the South China Sea, and they have long battled with Vietnam, and they've been taking over some islands that Vietnam claims, and they're both communists, and yet they fight because the imperial aspirations, if you will, of China are really without regard to ideology. They have to do with national interest. And so when communism was on the march, that was the way they marched, which is the traditional route. Okay. What you had go on historically was that prior to the Second World War, that whole peninsula constituted what was then called French Indochina. and it was a French colony. And the French were down there for the riches that were there. After in World War II, the Japanese pushed France out of there. And then, of course, the Japanese were defeated. And the North Vietnamese, which is an ethnically different people from the South Vietnamese, were being led and had been led since the mid-1930s by a man named Ho Chi Minh. And the indigenous group then sought, Ho Chi Minh was a communist, and he brought North Vietnam, his government, into the Communist Internationale back in the 1930s. In any event, that was the only existing organizational structure, if you will, that was there after the Japanese were driven out. And so he, of course, sought to impose communism there, and did. He was successful. And his agents in the South were called not Viet Cong then, but were called Viet Minh. And France sought to reimpose its colonial empire down there. And that was resisted by Ho Chi Minh and his Viet Minh, if you will, and that's what they call them. And initially, Ho Chi Minh and his forces were being just decimated by the French. The French were going through them like a hot knife through butter. And then there was published in France the fact, which was accurate, that the Légion étrangère, that's the great French Foreign Legion, all French officers, but troops recruited from all over the world, was at that time composed largely of veterans of the Waffen-SS. They had fled Germany and had sought refuge in the French Foreign Legion. And French Foreign Legion didn't care where you came from, what your name was, or anything else. If you could fight and could stand up to the extraordinary disciplinary challenge of the French Foreign Legion, fine. And of course, they were winning. Nobody kills like the Waffen-SS. Well, when that was published, it became politically intolerable in France. What do you mean? We're getting back our colonial empire by having the Waffen-SS fight for us? And so immediately, those people were withdrawn, and French, pure French troops were put in there. These are the same people who were defeated by the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS in something like 36 days in World War II. And their fortunes were reversed, and Ho Chi Minh and his horde started to win. President Kennedy, sought to aid that situation. Why? Because Ho Chi Minh was communist, and because they wanted to take over all the little nations down there and make them communist. And that was definitely directly against the national interest of the United States. President Kennedy was correct. What President Johnson did was two things. One, he continued that policy, that Kennedy policy, which was a correct policy, but then he made a very serious mistake. And he made it on the recommendation of Robert McNamara, who had been one of the whiz kids at Ford Motor Company and who had been taken into the government by Jack Kennedy. And McNamara had the odd idea that there is such a thing as limited warfare. He did not understand that if you go to war, you owe the people you send into battle every asset that you can possibly deploy to help them win that war as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. If all you've got are rocks, you owe them all the rocks you have.
Right.
If you've got sophisticated weapons, you owe them all the sophisticated weapons. You do not tell these people, go in harm's way, go into battle, be exposed to the best the enemy can throw at you, but You may not do this, you may not do that, you may not do
Yeah.
the other thing.
Okay.
So naturally, when your friends went over there, they said, you know, wait a minute, this is crazy. Because they would say, we're taking heavy fire from over there in that section. And we're calling in an airstrike over there. And back would come the reply, oh, heavens to Betsy. You can't have an airstrike because we're having a policy bombing pause.
Yeah.
And the guy said, well, what do you mean? Hey, these people are killing us. Sorry, we're having a policy bombing pause. And then they said, well, okay, we're taking heavy fire and everything from over there. We're going to go in there and clean out the enemy. They said, don't you dare go in there and clean out the enemy. He said, what are you talking about? Why not? They said, well, can't you read a map? Don't you see that dotted line through the jungle? You can't go over there. That's Cambodia. And he said, now, wait a minute. In World War II,
Yeah.
you know, when you were fighting against the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS, and they were hammering you from Belgium or the Netherlands or something of that sort, you didn't hesitate to go in there and knock them out on
Right.
the theory that we weren't at war with Belgium and the Netherlands. As a matter of fact, they were our conquered allies. You people are crazy. And, of course, it was crazy. It was
Yeah.
Robert McNamara's nitwit idea.
So
They were actually sitting in Washington in the war room saying, I wonder if we ought to hit Hill 309 today. Well, no, we hit 309 yesterday.
Yeah.
Well, they're calling from it now, but we hit them yesterday. We'll hit another hill today. And meanwhile, the guys down in 309, you know, are still dying. It was crazy. It was not the object of the war, which was legitimate. It was the nitwit prosecution of the war by the civilian leaders back in Washington. If they had simply let the military, if they said to Westmoreland, hey, you tell us what you want and go win the war.
Yeah.
That would have
That
done
makes
it.
sense. That makes sense. I think you have a real informative grasp, certainly more competent than I am on the history of that. But doesn't that make LBJ culpable, though? I mean, he hired an idiot and then listened to him, basically.
Well, yes, and it made him politically culpable, and it cost him his presidency, didn't
Yeah,
it?
as it should have.
As it should have. Absolutely right.
Well, you made a good point, and I'm glad I called you. I feel enlightened in that subject, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Rick.
Sure.
God bless.
Goodbye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a commercial break. When we return, I'll be joined by Randy Simmons. We'll discuss this question. And this is very interesting. This is an article by William K. Stevens, and the headline is, "The Evolution of Humans May at Last Be Faltering." A number of experts say that Homo sapiens is becoming increasingly disengaged from the forces of natural selection and speciation, the key processes that brought humankind into existence. Until quite recently on the evolutionary timescale, those processes bound humans to the confined and perilous existence of hunter-gatherers. But the explosion of human culture, already in full flower in the cave art of Europe some 35,000 years ago, has enabled the human species to liberate itself gradually from the harsh forces of natural selection. Natural selection has to some extent been repealed in the case of humans, says Dr. Steve Jones, a geneticist at the University of College London. Most social changes seem to be conspiring to slow down human evolution, he argues in a recent book, The Language of Genes, Solving the Mysteries of Our Genetic Past, Present, and Future. It's published by Anchor in 1994. Natural selection shapes species by choosing the fit over the unfit, generation after generation. Individuals born with advantageous genetic changes survive and have more progeny, while those who lose out in the genetic lottery may perish before even reaching breeding age. Oh, by George, I met breeding age a long time ago, and I'm still breeding. Let's see, the human line, until the relatively recent weakening of evolutionary pressures, evolved to exploit a life as hunters and gatherers. One major selective force on its emergence was climatic change. It was a global cooling around 5 million years ago, many paleontologists believe, that shrank the forests of Africa and induced the forebears of the human line, those genetically predisposed to do so, to walk upright and forage across the savanna. Other environmental disruptions forced further adaptation, leading eventually to hunting, tool making, and language. Along the way, scientists believe, some populations became isolated by barriers of geography or habitat, and they evolved differently enough to split into new species. Many species probably arose as the human line evolved, but only one now remains. Homo sapiens sapiens, The survivor is departing from the script of natural selection in a number of ways, experts say, and evolutionary forces on humans consequently have weakened. For instance, lions and leopards and saber-toothed cats do not carry off the weak and unfit as they once did. They're no longer there, says Dr. Elizabeth S. Bribba, an evolutionist at Yale University. Well, by George, you're right. And what we need is saber-toothed tigers carrying off those damn unfit. Get them downtown. Get them roaming the streets. And he says, since most people now survive to reproductive age, including slack-jawed nitwits that I've seen hanging around public high schools smoking with low, small upper body strength, even down here at Pius, the whatever it is, you see them. They go over there and stand around the McDonald's, you know, slack-jawed, hollow-cheeked youth with no upper body strength, sucking on those cancer sticks, and those little girls thinking that they're looking mature. At any rate, natural selection is being robbed of its most important raw material. If anyone survives and reproduces, no selection of the fittest can take place. In evolutionary terms, everyone is fit. Oh boy, if that ever is a lie. Humans, some evolutionists say, have wrapped themselves in such a snug cocoon, from clothing to central heating to hurricane warning systems, that populations are largely insulated from the environmental stresses that drive evolution. Technology and medicine also tend to cancel out inherited genetic defects. Colonies, emigration, and travel have also blunted the shaping forces of evolution. Where a population becomes isolated by geography from the rest of its species, it is most likely to evolve independently and eventually become a new species. Homo sapiens today is in a mode of intermixing rather than of differentiation, and the conditions for significant evolutionary change simply don't exist and won't, short of some all too imaginable calamity, writes Dr. Ian Tattersall, a paleoanthropologist at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. In The Fossil Trail, Oxford University Press, 1995. For Dr. Tattersall, the most striking factor in the relaxation of evolutionary pressures is the mobility of humans in the modern world. What you have is a species that is spread over a huge variety of environments. There is no barrier that humans cannot cross now. Humans are intermixing more than ever before, marrying people born in locations farther away and generally eliminating the isolation of populations that leads to speciation. And Dr. Stephen Jay Gould, an evolutionary expert at Harvard University, put it this way: we are not likely to speciate unless we send up some space colonies. All this suggests to some scientists that human evolution is winding down and that humankind, meaning mankind, of course, faces a long period of evolutionary stasis. Oh, my. Well, not if I've got anything to do with it. Well, anyway, breeding saber-toothed tiger, so get out of my way. Oh, my. John's willing to breed, but no, he can't get any takers. Oh, boy, he says he's trying. All right, girls. Well, let's see what we have here. This is Pamela Felice. And Ms. Felice sent me some email. I can't tell where she's from. She said, Mr. Liddy, I try to listen to your show on a regular basis and really enjoy it when I get a chance to tune in. You have a very unique sense of humor. No, I cannot have a very unique sense of humor. It is either unique or it is not. You can't have something qualify the word unique. And constantly keep me laughing. I enjoy your insight into the news. Enough brown-nosing. Here are my questions. Are you a founding member of the Dirty Old Men's Club? Well, really, no. I'm a founding member of the Dirty Young Men's Club, and I am now a member emeritus as a result of having been there so long. Why do you find it necessary to imitate Howard Stern when it comes to admiring females? Well, those of us who admire females just admire females. It's not my fault that Howard Stern and zillions of other men in this world also admire females. Now, just think of it, Pamela. If none of us men admired you, we all admire you. And we have that in common. I have that in common with Howard Stern. Gee, how old are you? I'm 64. In a conversation I had recently with another listener, they stated that you had reamed former President Carter. Didn't he give you your pardon from prison? Do I have my facts straight? Please keep us informed and laughing. Pamela Felice. Well, I did ream President Carter for certain things that he did. I thought that the agreement that he worked out with North Korea is very bad for the United States, and don't hesitate to repeat that. He never gave me a pardon, ever. He did give me a reduction of sentence from 21 and a half years down to, I think it was 8 years, which made me eligible for parole at just a hair under 5 years. And for that, I sent him a letter of thanks. Okay, but I'm sure he won't mind. It's by Quick Carl and the 357s. I'm sure Quick Carl is probably related to Fast Eddie somewhere. Quick Carl and the 357s are from Spokane, Washington. And here is what they sent us. I live in America! Yay! Virile, vigorous, and potent. Living in America. Sit high, New Orleans. New Orleans. Detroit City, or, as it is known there, Detroit City.
Detroit City. Yeah, bro. Believe me, that's bad. Believe me.
Dallas.
Dallas.
Pittsburgh, PA.
Pittsburgh, PA.
Spokane.
What? In America. Say how. Say listen. Living in America. Take my hand. I'll call the lesson. Living in America.
The G. Gordon Liddy Show.
Now that's what's happening.
And that is what's happening. Yes, indeed. Little touch of James Brown in there, ladies and gentlemen. That's Quick Carl and the 357s from Spokane, Washington. And this is DJ Heaven right here at your friendly G. Gordon Liddy Show. Here we go. And this is Philip Terzian, writing in the commentary section of the Washington Times. J. Edgar Hoover, who was not famous for his sense of humor, must be smiling at the moment. For now that the dust of Oklahoma City is slowly settling, there is one thing everyone in Washington agrees about. Something must be done about terrorism, and soon. Accordingly, President Clinton has commissioned his chief of staff, Leon Panetta, to redesign the omnibus anti-terrorism bill that was introduced in January in order, in the words of the White House, to strengthen the president's hand in combating domestic terrorism. We will still have freedom of speech, says Mr. Clinton. We'll have freedom of association. We'll have freedom of movement. But we may have to have some discipline in doing it so that we can go after people who want to destroy our very way of life. Discipline is the operative word here. What has this to do with J. Edgar Hoover? Well, the reason the hand of the federal government needs to be strengthened in the struggle against terrorism is because the hand of the federal government was weakened not so long ago in the struggle against terrorism, and that largely because of Hoover. That was in the 1970s. At that time, the same people who are deeply disturbed now about the existence of irregular militias or incendiary right-wing messages on the internet were equally disturbed about the FBI's attempt to infiltrate organizations that in those days were considered to be terrorists. Elements of the civil rights movement, especially violent separatist groups such as the Black Panthers and the anti-war movement, which Hoover believed, and probably correctly, was financed in some places by the Soviet Union. Once it became known that federal agencies such as the FBI had engaged in extensive infiltration, had broken into offices, stolen documents, planted bugs, and sought to disrupt activities, Congress swung into action. In public hearings chaired by the late Senator Frank Church of Idaho, it was learned that the FBI, at Hoover's instigation, had developed a sweeping counterintelligence program called COINTELPRO that had been aimed at neutralizing certain homegrown subversive political organizations. Hoover was dead by this time, and the definition of subversive was clearly in transition. At any rate, Congress was sufficiently horrified by the notion of domestic spying to dismantle COINTELPRO, reorganize the Bureau, increase the level of congressional oversight, and build sufficient statutory roadblocks to make future surveillance and penetration very difficult. And that's where we are today. While the performance of the FBI in cracking the Oklahoma case has been impressive, everyone, especially President Clinton, seems distressed by the fact that so little is known about the underground network and the paramilitary organizations that may or may not have nurtured the suspect in this case, Timothy McVeigh. The problem, of course, is that the FBI's relative ignorance is strictly in accordance with the wishes of Congress. And the irony is that in Washington, at any rate, yesterday's terrorist is today's hero, and vice versa. When Congress sought to protect the civil liberties of the Black Panthers or the Students for a Democratic Society or people channeling funds to communist guerrillas in Central America, it did not anticipate that its strictures would inevitably apply to all comparable organizations. So who wears the white hats and the black hats these days? Or, put another way, why was it bad to, quote, have some discipline so we can go after people in the 1970s when those people were bombing ROTC buildings on campus or targeting cops? But it is good to have some discipline so we can go after people who drill in fatigues on weekends and rage about Janet Reno. The answer is not easy. It is certainly true that the FBI ought to have a freer hand to grapple with domestic terrorism. The restrictions put in place 20 years ago were the fruits of political frenzy. But giving the president, any president, a virtual blank check to define a terrorist threat and to take, quote, whatever action may be necessary, end quote, in Bill Clinton's words, to counteract that threat is dangerous. For the definition of terrorism is fluid and imprecise. One day, Yasser Arafat is languishing on the watch list. The next day, he's chatting at the White House with Al Gore. And the definition of terrorism is conveniently elastic. The incumbent president has suggested that people who actively oppose abortion are virtual terrorists. A future chief executive may feel the same way about animal rights protesters, environmental activists, radio talk show hosts. J. Edgar Hoover must be savoring the spectacle. And civil libertarians, specialists in saving us from the dreaded school prayer, ought to worry where the war against terror might lead. Well, you're damn right they better worry. Absolutely. This is a bad business, ladies and gentlemen, especially even thinking about getting the military involved. Boy. Thank heavens we've got cooler heads in Orrin Hatch and Senator Dole. All right, crass commercial messages, and we will be right back. This size and term height. Never mind sideways, I'm talking up and down, vertically.
Right.
And then we would be formally introduced. We would be told that we were to, in the course of dancing, not come any closer than 18 inches.
Yeah.
And off we would go to have a hell of a good time.
Well,
and that's Catholic sex as I experienced it. Now, I was 40 years old, you know, before...
yeah, like what happened at 40?
Well, we had... I'll tell you what happened. We had 5 children at one time, Kathy, who were all under 5 years old. And, you know, finally I just said, wait a minute.
Yeah.
You know, wait a minute. This is nuts. And I started to reevaluate the whole thing. And I made a conscientious effort to straighten myself out. Now, my wife was not that screwed up because she had gone to public school. She only went to Catholic college.
Okay.
And so she was able to resist, a lot of the nonsense there. But still, she was a good Catholic girl, and she dutifully had her 5 children in under 5 years. I don't know whether it was humanly, physically possible to have children in more rapid succession than we did. And when I say I am virile, vigorous, and potent, Kathy, I am not kidding. If I walk past the statue of Joan of Arc in Paris, bingo, she's pregnant.
Well, can I ask you something else?
Sure.
You talk about being with other women. Now, is this true?
Yes.
Well, I mean, how does that size up with your Catholic beliefs?
It does not in any way measure up to the Catholic expectations, norms, standards of behavior or anything else, except one. And that is that we are all sinners. I certainly am. And my weakness is women.
Right.
And boy, am I into concupiscence, is all I can tell you. That I never did get that part straightened out.
So you're making up for all your 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, all my teenage, my college age years, and all of that kind of stuff, when I missed out on life.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you talking to me. Can I ask one other question?
Sure.
My son is 9 years old, and he's in Fairfax County Public Schools.
Mm-hmm.
And usually in 5th grade is when they start with the real sex education, and a lot of it is Planned Parenthood based. What do you think, I mean, as far as what you've learned in a Catholic school?
Well, what I've learned in Catholic school is that the Roman Catholic doctrine is that so-called artificial contraception is immoral.
Right.
I don't believe that. Nothing is being
I kind
destroyed.
of am on the wall with that one. I'm not sure.
Well, here's the thing. I absolutely, whether I was a Catholic or not, I would not believe in aboltion because it's very clear.
I agree with you.
I've seen those little babies inside their mummy's tummy, with the sonograms and things like that.
Right.
And I am not a fool, and I know what my senses see and what my mind tells me.
Right.
And I could not conceivably bring myself to do a thing like that, to destroy that innocent life. Now, contraception, however, simply means that you do not generate a child. There's nothing that's being destroyed, in other words, and it is just that for the sake of the health of the mother or for your ability to properly deal with the situation financially or something like that, you postpone the delightful fruit of your union.
Right, and also, a picture of natural family planning is like a picture of a family of 6 people. It doesn't work.
Well, Kathy, we were practicing rhythm, and it got us 5 kids under 5.
Right.
I mean, maybe it works for the Pope, but it sure never worked for me.
Well, it doesn't work for my brother and sister-in-law either. They've got 4 kids under the age of 6, so...
And I will say this, and you might give this some thing, if you still have some qualms of conscience about it, if you shop around in the confessional, do what Mrs. Liddy did. She shopped around in the confessional.
Yeah.
She found a kindly old Jesuit who said, for heaven's sake, go ahead.
Yeah.
Like, just forget it.
Yeah.
And you said, you're a good woman, and you're doing the right thing, and stop worrying about it.
Right.
And that would be my advice to you. You go right ahead with the contraception.
Well, mine is abstinence. I have.
Oh boy, are you looking for trouble? You're going to end up. You're going to end up with a husband.
On other days I don't really care.
But I don't mean trouble in terms of what I'm saying is you're going to end up possibly with a husband like me.
I'll kick him out of the house.
Well, that's all right. I mean, there's always that option, and he always has that problem. But
well, I guess if he could provide me with lots of money, I could probably overlook a few things.
Well, that's true. You'd be surprised that generally speaking, I mean, I'm speaking about now taking the entire range of male-female relationships. The attitude toward sex and homemaking and marriage and what have you of men and women differ because their roles are essentially different.
Right.
A woman, a man generates semen, he can be 90-some-odd years old. Every day he has a fresh supply of brand new spermatozoa. A woman is issued X number of M1A1 mod 0X eggs by God, when she is born, and that's it. And instinctively she knows that, and she also knows that that the nurturing and the childbearing and everything are going to be essentially hers. That she it is her natural inclination to look for, first of all, a man who. There is a good chance that he will stay there and help her to raise those children. He's not going to be off in 18 months. That's thing number 1. 2, that he is good genetic material. She has good genetic material, and she doesn't want to marry a nitwit.
Well, in reading your book, I read Will. I was surprised the way you talked about your wife's genetic makeup.
Well, you ought to read Colonel Lindbergh. The same thing. So why he married Anne Morrow. Same thing. That's where I got the idea.
Right.
But then also, the consideration of a woman is, I'm going to have good, high-quality children here. I'm not going to downgrade my genetic potential.
Right.
The man's going to be here to help raise those children. And now, what are the conditions in which the prospective children that I may bear are going to be raised? Will there be sufficient funds to send them to a good school, to have a good home, and so on and so forth?
Right.
And women, a lot of times, they'll say, well, he doesn't thrill me, and this, that, and the other thing, but he's a good man. He's a good man. And they'll settle. They'll settle. Women tend to settle. Men, if they perceive themselves as being less than attractive for one reason or anything like that, they will settle. If they perceive themselves to be really something,
right,
they don't want to settle.
Exactly.
Okay.
I say more men don't perceive themselves as nothing. I mean, all men think they're special in one way or another.
They're not all, but you'd be surprised. There are men who do not have high self-esteem for one reason or another. They may have had problems in their childhood or something of that sort. And oftentimes this is not warranted. They actually are, quite fine, but they don't perceive it that way, and so they don't act that way.
Right.
But this is the general way. Now, the way that nature sort of programs us is for you to be conservative about your eggs and what's going to happen and everything else.